You're listening to the Fort Erie Podcast, your local source for upcoming events, hot new listings, and bite-sized interviews with business and community leaders. Here's your host, Brent Jones.
Thank you for tuning in to the Fort Erie Podcast. I'm your host, Brent Jones, and you're listening to Season 2, Episode 8. It is Tuesday, April 14th, 2020. Let's get right into it. Did you have a happy Easter, Fort Erie? I sure hope you did. I hope the Easter Bunny was good to you. And folks, I gotta say, I'm just positively thrilled that podcasts are audio only because I don't know about all of you, but I am overdue for a trip to the barber shop. I mean, this mop on my head is getting out of control. Anyway, it's a good thing we didn't have to get together with our families this Easter, huh? We'd all be looking a bit scruffy around the dinner table. Anyway, quick shout out to my barber, by the way. If you need men's barbering services, and no, he did not pay me to say this, but barbering services, including a wet shave when it's safe to do so, go see Mike Daigle, the Bridgeburg gent down at Fate Salon. He's a great guy and charges very reasonable prices and has an amazing selection of grooming products for men. My guest today is going to be Bobby Singh, co-owner of the Garrison Club, of course on Garrison Road. And the Garrison Club, as with a lot of local businesses right now, it's certainly facing uncertain times. But back before all this started, Bobby was kind enough to join me for an interview by phone. We'll get to that conversation shortly, but first, this is the last week I'm going to mention this, Fort Erie, but if you make an online donation to Fort Erie Meals on Wheels, I'll give you a free Fort Erie Podcast t-shirt. Check out the show notes below this episode for details. All right, I've got 4 local health heroes I want to highlight for you guys on this episode, and man, some of you are like really digging these health heroes posts that I've been putting up on Facebook and Instagram. I mean, some of the posts this week got well over 100 likes, tons of shares, dozens of comments. So in no particular order, here we go. I want to give a shout out to Dr. RJ Kamatovic and his staff, nominated by Katie Jai and Tracy Ennis, among several others. He was quite the fan favorite among Fort Erie residents. Shout out to Dr. Kim Schur and his team, nominated by Marion Sager and Maureen Pettit, another local hero, with some commenters going so far as to call him an angel. Wow. Next, I want to recognize China Fulton, a nurse with Douglas Memorial Hospital, nominated by Lori Brady. And last but not least, Nancy Mathis, whose photo you can check out. Actually, you can check out photos for all of these health heroes in the show notes below this episode. But Nancy is a PSW, and she was nominated by Heather Oliver. And in Nancy's photo, she's got on some serious protective gear to keep her safe during these difficult times. So if you'd like to nominate a local health hero for a shout out on a future episode, please head on over to theforteriepodcast.com and click contact at the top of the page. All right, here's a peek at what's making news at the moment. Fort Erie Public Library is asking our community to preserve bits of COVID-19 history. They're asking for items like photos, letters, journals, observations, poems, even videos to include as part of a digital archive. So Adult Services Librarian Sean Fleming, who I had on the podcast as a guest last season, by the way, he compared this moment in time to the famous blizzard of '77 and wants to get the public involved in helping to record the pandemic as it was experienced by residents of Fort Erie. All right, that about does it for local news for the week. Now it's time for my chat with Bobby Singh. Welcome back, everybody. I am chatting on the phone, a little bit of long distance here, with Bobby Singh, co-owner of the Garrison Club. How are you, Bobby?
I'm well, Mr. Jones. How are you today?
Hey, I'm great, man. Thanks for taking a few minutes to chat with me. I appreciate that.
It's on my bucket list, sir. How could I not?
Well, I appreciate that. Let me start by asking you this, Bobby. What makes Fort Erie such a great place to live and work?
You know, I actually get asked that quite a bit. And I think what's interesting about the town we live in is it's not a pretentious place to be. And I just want to clarify, you know, there aren't too many communities that you can really just walk around and be yourself, right? There's always this idea of, well, I better make sure my hair looks great, or I better make sure I have my makeup on. Whereas in Fort Erie, everyone is just everybody. What you see is what you get. There really isn't a lot of, because, I'm comparing it really to Toronto. There really isn't a lot of faux, if you will. So I love that about Fort Erie. And I think whether you work here or live here or whatever your time spent in Fort Erie is, the fact that you can just be yourself. I've been all over Ontario. There really aren't a lot of communities that you can just be yourself.
Well, that's not only an interesting answer, but an original answer. I don't think I could have said it better myself, and I don't think anyone to this point has described Fort Erie quite that way. And you grew up in Fort Erie, right?
Actually, no, I grew up outside of Fort Erie. My mom and I, we purchased the business we have in Fort Erie 20 years ago. So we arrived in 2000 and, have sort of spent the last 20 years just being a part of the community in different ways. And, it's really interesting because when we arrived, it was, a very different community. It was,
sure.
It was just before 9/11, the dollar was really different. And so over the last 20 years, we've really experienced a changing face in Fort Erie for sure.
Sure. What makes the Garrison Club, let's say, unique or different compared to other restaurants or bars in the area?
How we try and make it different is, I think that was a really interesting challenge, Brent, right? There's a lot of great different bars and restaurants in town. And it always comes down to how do we make it different? So we try and focus on more community-centric things. I think a lot of bars and restaurants really focus on their menu or, really great service, or having really great live acts. And I think a lot of the bars in town do that really, really well. We try and focus on experience. So we try and focus on when you come to the club or when you hang out at the Garrison Club, we focus on that that being yourself, right? You can just hang out. There isn't really a lot of loud music. There really isn't, an overly abundant crowd. It really is a place where people come to relax and chill, whether inside or during the warmer months on the deck.
Right.
So we really focus on that experience. We want people to feel comfortable here. We're not here to push product on them.
Well, and you have a pool table too, right? I mean, can anybody come in and play pool or?
We do. You are a better advocate than I, sir. Yes, we have two pool tables where people can come in and hang out and play pool. And I actually have been spending more time at the table, so I'm actually taking lessons. Believe it or not, there's actually somebody that can give you lessons on how to play billiards and pool.
Nice.
So I'm starting to pick that up. But we do have that. We definitely have our DJ booth. So one of the things at the Garrison that we really love to share with people is it's a great event space. We really, really want community members who, whether it's private, they're having a birthday party or a celebration, or a lot of our nonprofits in town, we really want them to see the Garrison as an event space they could leverage with all the audio, video, and again, the space that we have. We really, really want to get that out there as well. So we have, it's all set up for great events.
Okay, well, let's do this, Bobby. I want to do kind of a rapid fire question round with you here to help listeners get to know you personally a little bit better. So I'm going to rattle off a whole series of questions here. You blurt out the first answer that pops into your head. Okay, are you ready?
Okay, here we go.
No pressure. Okay. Let's start with this. Favorite flavor of ice cream?
Chocolate.
Chocolate. Okay. Do you believe in fate?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Favorite number?
21.
Wow. It's specific. Okay. Have you ever worn socks with sandals?
No. I have limits.
All right. What does a person need to be happy?
To love themselves, really.
Nice. If Voldemort offered you a hug, would you accept it?
If I loved myself, yeah. For any other reason, probably not.
Is double dipping at a party ever acceptable?
Never. That's sandals and socks. No.
What were you for Halloween last year?
Embarrassingly enough, a hot dog. I was a hot dog.
You were a hot dog for Halloween?
My son was a burger, and he begged for an accompanying hot dog. So I was a hot dog. By the way, I'm selling that costume online if anyone's interested.
I love it.
It's a one-time use.
I love it. All right. Let's get back to the restaurant. You passed the rapid fire question round. You did okay. You did okay.
I'm sweating, but good. Thank you.
You talked a bit about the experience at the Garrison Club, and I know earlier this year you started like a welcome night for people who are new to the Fort Erie area. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, the objective was my time at the Garrison was really, really spent just coming down every so often. And then about a year ago, I left my government job And so, it's a really interesting thing to leave a really great paying job to sort of discover yourself, right? To really understand why you're not happy. And so, I spent the last year in Fort Erie at the Garrison Club really understanding and figuring things out. And what I realized was, there's a lot of us, like you and your lovely wife, for example, that live in the community that tend to leave the community for activities. I think we struggle in Fort Erie to create a lot of opportunity for people to experience Fort Erie itself. People go to Niagara and St. Catharines and Welland. So I wanted an opportunity not only for us to create something for people who have moved to town, whether it's in the last 6 months or the last 5 years, to connect and meet each other and get to know each other. But it was also great feedback, and we are going to do a lot more of these events, but great feedback to hear from them what kind of events they want to have in town. Right. Because I think, as a business owner, one of the fallacies a lot of us business owners have is we do what we think we need to do. We sometimes forget to ask people what is it they want. So we think, we should totally have a dart night. Nobody's having a dart night. But then you actually ask people and they say, no, I'm blind in one eye. It doesn't work. So it really is a chance not only to connect and meet people, but hear from people what it is that we want in town or we need in town. The other thing we're trying to do is invite a lot of services. So I've invited a lot of town council members. I've invited a lot of our nonprofits to say, come in and share what it is you do. Because again, I think a lot of Fort Erians the only way they define themselves as Fort Erians is by postal code. Right. Does that make sense? They say, no, I go to Niagara, I go to St. Catharines, I go to Hamilton, but the only Fort Erie part of them is their postal code. So how do these Welcome to Fort Erie events are really about how do we create something locally where people can just enjoy and be themselves?
Well, that makes perfect sense. And so, Bobby, I'm going to put links in the show notes below for listeners to check out the Garrison Club, Facebook page, website. See what you guys have going on, because I know there's always plenty of new events happening. And I want to thank you so much for taking some time and chatting with me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you, sir.
Welcome back, everybody. Of course, the Garrison Club is not operating as usual right now amid COVID-19, but speaking with Bobby over the weekend, it seems that the Garrison Club may be offering takeout, at least part-time, and they may also be able to sell you a gift certificate that can be redeemed at a later time. So for more information, I'd recommend you direct all of your questions to either Bobby or Karen at 289-320-8997. And now it's time for another edition of
This Month in Fort Erie History, presented by HalfpennyDreadfuls.com.
On April 16, 1835, the Erie and Ontario Railroad Company received a government charter to begin operation. It would be the first railroad in Canada. In 1864, the railroad provided passenger service to those crossing from Buffalo. Like the steamboat and ferry services, the line didn't operate during the winter. In 1869, it became the Canadian Southern Railroad, boasting 3 trains per day between Fort Erie and Niagara-on-the-Lake. The line continued to operate until the mid-1920s, when passenger service was terminated. After just over 100 years in service, Canada's first rail line ceased all operations in 1959.
I just love those, don't you? In case you aren't familiar with Mrs. Mooney's Halfpenny Dreadfuls, Mrs. Mooney and her partner, Mr. Michael Fury, offer haunted walks and history tours throughout Fort Erie. So when conditions improve a little, I strongly recommend looking them up online, checking it out. My wife and I did a haunted Bridgeburg tour last fall with them, and it was a lot of fun and super educational too. All right, folks, join me next Tuesday for a new episode of the Fort Erie Podcast. Fun fact, I conducted a survey at the end of season 1, and about 24 of you completed it. And one of the questions I asked on the survey was, who was your favorite guest from season 1? Well, by no small margin, Phil Smith was my most popular season 1 guest. So as decided by you, the listeners, I've invited Phil to be back on the show for next week. We'll be spending some time talking about new developments in Crystal Beach, as well as Phil's highly successful restaurant, South Coast Cookhouse. Okay, so long, everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll chat with you next week.
You've been listening to the Fort Erie Podcast with your host, Brent Jones, a sales representative with RE/MAX Niagara Realty Limited Brokerage. Follow @BuyWithBrent on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates. Subscribe to the Fort Erie Podcast on popular platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and catch a new bite-sized episode every week. Until next time.